Risk Committee. This is a meeting of the Council which is held in public. It is not a public meeting. There is no fire drill planned, so if the fire alarm sounds, please leave by the exit nearest the large screen at the front of the room. And proceed down to the fire exit down the courtyard. Once it's safe to return, councillors will receive a text message and officers will also advise when it's safe to return to the meeting. We are recording the meeting this evening using our webcasting system. The webcast will be transmitted live and will also be available on the council's website following the meeting. All mobile devices should be switched off or set to silent so that the meeting is not interrupted by ringtones. Everyone? Okay, that's it. There's no public in attendance at the moment, so I'm not going to read the rest. So, have we got any apologies for absence? Anyone, please?
We have apologies from Councillors Headley and Councillor Palmer.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest.
Sorry, Chair. Chair, sorry, Steve Bladen from BDO is also not able to get here. Steve Bladen from BDO is not able to get here tonight either, who's doing the external audit update.
Sorry about that. Right, the minutes. Has everybody read the minutes? Oh, don't all look at me. I'm so excited. Okay, so can we have an agreement? Are you all happy with the minutes? Yeah? Or any abstentions? No? Yeah. All in agreement? Okay, thank you. Okay, so item 4, external audit update to be read out by Jonathan.
Yeah. Yes, thank you,
I've
Chair.
got it here. Look.
Good.
I'm so good.
Thank you, and apologies, members. Steve couldn't make it. He was unable to get around the M25. But I'll give a very brief update, and hopefully we can answer most questions between myself and Owen. Predominantly, the report was to update members of the committee on the progress on outstanding external audits. And just to remind members, we have audits outstanding from 2021 onwards, and BDO cover 2021, 21, 22 and 22, 23. So across the sector, the backlog in audits has been a common theme across. So MHCLG has now worked with the Financial Reporting Council, and ultimately ministers came back in July this year with a plan on proposals to address the backlog of audits. Subsequently, there's then been legislation laid in Parliament and a revised code of practice from the National Audit Office, which then supports completion of the audits by a backstop date of 13th of December 24, and that's for all audits up to and including 22-3. BDO were due to provide a progress update on that, and I did have a chance to speak with Steve today, so I can give a very brief update. And we're at different stages in different years. So for 2021, we are in virtually a fully complete audit status, but we have remaining issues on value for money conclusion, which the team are continuing to look at and could be, and it could have an impact on meeting that date. That value for money conclusion is done as a 3-year block for this backstop period. So all of the value for money conclusions are being treated as one. If any issue arises, though, it will be allocated to a specific year. So we are navigating one issue with them. We will provide all the information from our end. There's still 6 weeks or so till that date. So it will really just be determined by their assessment of the final piece of information. And that will ultimately determine whether we meet the 13th of December date. If we don't meet that date, it still needs to be done as soon as possible thereafter, and as soon as one of those, or all three sets of accounts essentially will be met in parallel because the VFM conclusion will relate to all 3 years. When we move forward beyond that, 23/4 is then due to be delivered by our other external auditors, so the new external auditors, Ernst & Young, and they will deliver that by, I think on the top of my head it's the 28th of February next year. So we hope to be in a position by the end of February next year where we've cleared 4 audits. But I think the other thing I've just noticed that we will have hopefully a full assurance audit for 2021, but we will have modified opinions and disclaimer opinions for the other 3 years. The broad gist of the guidance they have been provided with is to do the level of work they can achieve within that timescale, essentially. So they will focus on priority items within the time they have. They will then report back to you as a committee with the work they've done and, more importantly, the areas where they're disclaiming their opinion. And so we won't have full assurance audits for those 3 subsequent years, but we then will have a position from which they can rebuild the level of assurance required to get back to fully complete audits. There's 2 documents attached to as enclosures to this paper. One sets out that road to recovery, and I'd recommend members read that in a bit more detail, but broadly it shows how they will build back up to that level of assurance in subsequent periods, and it gives a bit more detail on how the backstop dates will be implemented prior to that. I think that's broadly all there is to say at the moment. It's unfortunate Stephen couldn't get here because he could obviously give you a bit more detail on their progress from their perspective, but we are provisionally looking for dates for that audit committee to bring back, first of all, those 3 sets of accounts for you to all see and receive their opinions in whichever form they come in. Our sort of date at the moment we're looking at is potentially the 10th of December, but subject to the completion of that piece of work. So I'll stop there, Chair, and just open up to questions.
Thank you. Has anybody got any questions? Come on. Yes, our independent person.
Is there a planned handover with Ernst & Young, and if so, what's going to happen and timescales, etc.?
Yes, thank you. So both sets of auditors have already been in communication throughout. Following my call today, actually, Stephen is going to get in touch with Ernst & Young to update on their current position. And yes, traditionally, the handover would have been around a lot of the opening balances on the balance sheet. So obviously Ernst & Young will assess the position BDO, leave things in. There will still be handover mechanisms in place, but it will be an unusual situation, and you certainly won't be getting full assurance on opening balances, and that's where that part about rebuilding assurance comes in subsequent periods.
Yeah, Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. This is a situation for many other councils as well. Do we know how many other, so that we can compare ourselves to other councils?
I don't have the figures with me, but we can share something subsequently. They report broadly on how many audits have been signed off annually. So I'm sure we can get the last reported position for you. So we'll circulate that. But it is fair to say across the country, this is a common situation. And across Essex, it's a common situation. Most people have not had the 22/3 or 21/2 accounts signed off. Some have had 2021. Occasionally, there's 1 or 2 maybe further progressed, but broadly, I'd say that's a rough average for the point we're at now. And hence the reason they need a backstop nationally, because they are catching up across the board. It's not just 1 or 2 councils.
Councillor Murphy.
Oh, it works. I'm reading the notes today, which are quite fresh in my mind because I didn't read them until about 5. We had an original, if I remember correctly, the 24th of September for these accounts to be done. It then slipped to the 13th of December, which was another 6-8 weeks. And now we're slipping again. What is to stop these just continue slipping? It seems to me that if you state we will do them by that date, a day or so, yeah, I can accept. But this is 2 months from September to September to December, and now it's even further. And secondly, is there any way these accounts can be segmented? So I don't know how many. I'm not. I favoured the way of all the different parts of the council audits, but if there is 10 areas that they can get on and say, right, area 1 is complete, area 2 is complete, and we can, if you like, sign them off. Area 9 is problematical because it sounds as though the 21-22 is 90% now, and we should be signing off 9 out of 10 of it and saying, yeah, that's fine. This last bit, does it affect the whole lot, or could we sign off 9 out of 10 and just leave that to sign off at a later stage? And forward going in years to come, the same thing, split them up into 10. The first bit can perhaps be in front of the committee a month later and say, yep, that's out of the way, and then 3 bits, yep, that's out of the way, and then obviously we know which bits are being concentrated on and which bits are holding us up.
So the short answer to the second part is no. But we do get that assessment at our end, so we are liaising with them. But what they're actually issuing is 2 opinions. They're issuing one on the financial statements as a whole, and they're issuing one on the arrangements we've got in place to deliver value for money. So obviously, therefore, they have to complete all of the work to sign off each of those items. We're actually stuck on the value for money conclusion element of that, but it is all covered in their opinion, all the 2 elements covered in their opinions. Obviously, I can't give you too much more detail because obviously Stephen was here to provide that detail, but it is fair to say 2021 is broadly complete, subject to 1 outstanding issue. The 21-2, 22-3 will be very much in a disclaimer opinion, i.e. they'll be doing very limited work and they will be disclaiming their opinion and moving on to the subsequent year. Sorry, Councillor, just remind me on your first point. What was your first point?
What to stop it slipping again? We've already gone from September to December. Yeah. Are we going to be talking about April next?
So that is obviously a frustration of us officers, and Owen certainly will know this has been. Obviously, we're talking about 2021 audit, so this has moved a number of times. The reason for the slippage most recently was broadly, as I understand it, resourcing at their end. So their resource was allocated to other jobs, so it came back into our audit later than expected. The 13th was intended to be a hard backstop, and hence these modified opinions. The only reason, there's a couple of reasons you can slip, there's not many reasons you can slip from the 13th date, but 2 of the reasons, for example, would be there was an outstanding objection to your accounts that wasn't yet completed. But the reason we're struggling with is that the value for money conclusion, there's an item which is a discussion around an area of legality, and any area of legality has to be fully resolved before they will enable the sign-off. So, as I say, we are facilitating that discussion. We've provided information from our end, and we've been asked for 1 more item to provide, which we will do so. And we hope to, therefore, there's still 5 weeks or so before that date for consideration from external audit. So, yeah, thanks, Councillor.
Any more questions, everyone? Oh, Councillor Davis.
Thank you. So there's the 21 will be full assurance, and the other 2 will be disclaimer. Could you, in a nutshell, sort of explain what that means as a disclaimer and how that impacts us as a council?
So a full assurance audit would obviously take a risk-based assessment of all the balances in our financial statements. So they will assess on what they call materiality, and they will target their testing appropriately to cover all priority areas in the accounts in line with an agreed audit plan, which they would have brought to this committee many years ago. With the limited assurance, they are targeting work to do as much as they can in a very limited timescale. So just by definition, there'll be lots of areas they haven't looked at. And the disclaimer opinion will reflect the work they have done, and more importantly, the work they haven't done. So where does that leave us as a council? Well, we haven't got full assurance on our balances, essentially, at the end of it. So when a full assurance audit happens, you come away understanding your levels of reserves and your financial position has been fixed at a point in time, as it were. You've then got that assurance externally that you can then use those balances and spend them in the future. What we'll be left with, and many other councils will be left with, is there is that underlying level of risk that those balances are not as fully available as we would have otherwise liked them to have been in a signed off position. Obviously, there's wider processes in the council, so there's still other forms of assurance. Mike's doing an internal audit update and has an internal audit plan throughout the year. We've got systems and controls and checks and balances at the council. So we're always confident in the draft accounts we supply, and we will have a bit more assurance from the work they do. So there is a sort of overview of assurance coming. You also get an annual governance statement which comments more broadly on the council's arrangements in place. But it's fair to say there is a gap in the normal level of external assurance we would be supplied with, and that will only be rebuilt through the recovery process that I mentioned earlier.
Who was first? Councillor Jeffrey, it's your turn.
Thanks, Chair. Just looking at Appendix 1 of the letter that we received from BDO, you may have already discussed this, but it said about actions required by the council. So I just wonder how far we've got through that list. Thanks.
Yeah, so we've been in ongoing liaison with BDO for a couple of months now. So all of the items on that list have been completed. They have a system called Inflow, and they basically put their requests into Inflow, and we answer the request back to them in Inflow. So it's a constant, basically updated list of requirements. We don't expect anything to be outstanding ahead of the 13th of December from our end. We've got this one further request we've had today, which we will also supply. So, yeah.
Councillor Murphy?
When you say that the non-assured balances, as it were, are, let's say we've got £1 million in the bank, but we're not 100% sure whether we can spend the £1 million or not, what percentage, have we got some indication of what percentage could be assured of that, and the percentage that we feel should be left just in case?
So probably not in percentage terms, but we will take a very balanced view of the reserve positions at the end of the year, and we certainly will have a broad level of contingency that would be expected to cover such occurrences. But in our reserves themselves, though, we also set out a number of reserves which are exactly for that purpose anyway. So we cover interest rate risk, investment loss risk, we cover if our housing company doesn't quite deliver the return we were expecting. So we've got, broadly, we are aware of most of where the risk would lie anyway. So when we set our accounts, obviously we produce our draft accounts, we're making that assessment. And our contingency levels within those reserves are then our protection against that. I mean, the reserve levels we are happy with in their current form. What we can't anticipate is if there was a further audit issue that was not catered for within those planned reserves. We've got our general fund reserve that then is the backstop for that, and that's generally got around £3 million in it. So we feel confident we can cover anything within our expectation level at the moment. There's no wider issues in the sector that are being shared, because we hear about issues when they arise in other councils. There's nothing that's ringing any alarm bells or coming through the grapevine, as it were, that says, my God, we might have to look at that. But having said that, there's sometimes, when audits are in full flow, sometimes an issue gets picked up at one council that then is circulated to others. And that's the part we've not had for a couple of years. And there may be a very technical issue, say, for example, that, you know, these things do come up occasionally. But I think it's fair to say, I think we're well protected as a council, and I think compared to many other councils, we've been in a very healthy financial position. So I think it would take a significant shock initially to change that.
Any other questions? No? Owen, have you got anything? No. Okay, so shall we go to the recommendation, which is that the committee note the updated position in respect of both the external audit of the financial statements and the VFM opinions for 2020, 21, 21, 22, 22, 23. All in favour? 4? Yeah.
We vote on a no. That's all.
Yeah, well, we'll stick our hands up anyway. It just makes it look good, doesn't it? Yeah, okay. Right. Right, item 5. Who's this going to be? Mike? It's your turn.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of progress, in terms of completing the audit plan for 2024-25, we've actually completed 4 audits to date. I was hoping to bring the main points arising from those completed audit engagements, but we're still waiting on final sign-off from senior management. In addition to those 4 completed audits, we've commenced work on a further 4 audits, and they're nearing completion. So hopefully we'll be completed quite a bit of the plan in the next couple of weeks. And I'll bring the results and main points arising from those audits to the next meeting. In terms of progress made by service departments in implementing audit recommendations, we only have 34 live recommendations on the system at the moment. Only 16 of those are currently overdue, and only 1 of those recommendations is classified as a major priority. Moving on to the work of the fraud team, the fraud team continues to make good progress in terms of basically conducting investigations. We have a high volume on a number of investigations to undertake. If you look at the table provided, cashable savings are up around £64,000 at the moment, and non-cashable savings around £769,000. In addition to that, we highlight the number of properties, council's properties we get back from our work. So that's in relation to illegal subletting, where the properties these were returned by the resident. And at the moment, we have 4 properties returned. Other work we look at is right to buy applications, and we've actually stopped 5 right to buy applications to date. We also look at housing applications, and again, stopped a further 5 housing applications. So you can see from that the work of the audit, the fraud team continues apace, and we're making good progress in terms of that. I'm quite happy to take any questions in relation to those items.
Has anyone got any questions? No? No? Want to say anything? Looks like you've got off lightly this time.
Thank you, Chair.
So we go for the recommendation that the contents of the report be received and noted. Okay. Right. Next one. That's Sarah. It's your turn.
Thank you, Chair. So if I can ask members to turn to agenda item 6, which is on pages 57 to 66. This is our general report to provide the committee with the outcome of the Q2 assurance process surrounding the effectiveness and compliance with the council's arrangements, and an up-to-date progress in respect to the council's annual governance statement. So in relation to the Q2 assurance process, the concerns raised are categorised into 3 common themes. So we have compliance. So although we've done a lot of work around the role of the manager, particularly around behaviours, further work is required to ensure that officers comply with training, specifically standards, specifically relating to the quality and timeliness of data for corporate reporting. This is an AGS action, but at the moment the dates have been pushed back as we're currently out to recruitment for a new corporate leadership team, but we do expect progress to be made on that over the before the end of the year. Service effectiveness. So there's been some concerns raised regarding the timeliness of engaging with support services. So the services continue to reinforce the importance of the early engagement to identify and mitigate against risk, and to ensure that matters can be progressed effectively and efficiently. And then the last one was the senior management restructure. So there is an update to that since this report was written, in that the Appointments Committee have identified a preferred chief executive and an executive director of growth and partnerships, who will be recommended to full council in mid-November. And then finally, on enclosure number 1, you've got the progress that has been made against the overarching actions for the annual governance statement. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Anyone got any comments, any questions? No? Nothing?
I was only just going to say, really, just to highlight that link between what Jonathan was saying and the AGS, which is really that foundation to that governance to give us comfort that we've got those process procedures in place. So it's just linking those two together, really.
Thank you. So, no other further comments. So, let's have the recommendation that the committee notes the assurances received for Q2, which is 24-25, and that the progress against the actions arising from the annual governance statement be noted as set out in enclosure 1. Okay. We're going fast. Okay. Item 7. Sarah.
Again. Okay, so this report then is to provide an overview of the Council's risk management arrangements and activities during Q1 and Q2. The report confirms that the Council has in place a robust risk management framework and generally it's working well across the organisation. So the Council has an agreed risk appetite which has been established to set boundaries for risk taking and to ensure that risks are accepted and proportionate to their possible rewards. So enclosure number 1 contains all of the corporate and significant risks that are currently above the Council's risk appetite. We've continued to review and report on these risk profiles for the Council, and we continuously work with services to review the Council's risks as part of our governance arrangements. We have 17 corporate risks which are enclosed for enclosure number 2. Cyber security, information governance and waste strategy are currently scored as reds and are above the Council's risk appetite, but we do have actions in place and they are being closely monitored to manage these risks. Of the corporate risks, there are some amber risks that impact the Council's governance arrangements. These have been highlighted within the Council's annual governance statement as an area for further improvement and as such may feature within the action plan for the AGS. So the key areas are project management, information governance and our local plan. With regards to the audit and risk working group, we've had one working group so far this year where members reviewed benefit fraud and housing repairs. We've got further meeting schedules with the next one being on the 27th of November. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Yes.
Sarah, on the cyber security is coded as red. In the commentary it says an issue around external assessments. Can you just explain that? Just expand on that, please.
Yeah, there's usually some external systems around public connectivity and things around that, where we comply with the code. I don't think we're compliant at the moment. I think we're working towards that. So there's basically compliance that we have to meet. I think we're working towards that. Currently, we're not compliant.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Thanks, Chairman. Just on page 73, or at least it is on my PDF here, it's got most of the targets as 6, say, but on the waste strategy, for example, is at 12. And there's quite a few where some of them are below, but just the other one, you've got, say, the failure to replace Civica and things like that. I'm just wondering, what exactly is your team doing to bring these down and hopefully get it to 0? But just an update on that, please.
Okay, so realistically, we're never going to get a risk to 0. There's always going to be a compromise between the resources available. So, like 0 isn't achievable. However, there are very detailed action plans for each of the risks that are on here. They're not my risks, so I can provide you with further information. But I don't know, Irene, have you got anything to?
Okay, thank you. If you can do that.
Obviously, the responsibility of managing the risk is individual services, so they own those plans, those mitigations. So if members got particular interest, they can be looked at as part of the working group, and that's what the working group tends to do. But again, it's the services who work, they understand the services better, they understand the mitigations better, how to address them. So they lead that process.
Sorry, what I'll just add to that. I mean, we work closely along with service department, looking at their control environment. So we look to mitigate risks as well and bring down the risk scores. But as Sarah said, you can't mitigate it entirely. So you can't bring it down to zero. But the work of internal audit is risk based. So we look at the key risks to the council and look at the control environment, hoping to basically lessen the risk.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Thanks. It's just when I'm looking at some of the boxes here, it's been, say, 12 from Q3 of 23-24, and it's still rolling now to the latest score. So it's obviously the risk. That's what I'm interested in, is that it's been there for quite some time. And I'm just wondering whether it's you've got an action plan, but it's not actually ever going to bring it down. So maybe the target should change, because then that gives me the impression that if there's still the gap from over these sets of quarters, that what's actually being done, because I can see the risk title and the sort of blurb, but there's no sort of further detail on that.
Sarah?
Yeah, so yeah, what you're saying, I can understand what you're saying. We have got action, so if you look at the waste strategy, obviously things have changed recently over the last sort of 6 to 12 months. So we did have an action plan that had to then be reviewed, and obviously it takes a bit more time to actually put those actions into place. Some of them are not quick fixes, they're going to take a bit of time. But if there's any particular, we have got the waste on the work plan for the working group, so we're happy to call the officers in and they can talk you through and provide you with the assurance that we are actually moving forward.
Any further comments? No. Right. Oh, Councillor Davis.
Thank you. I mean, on enclosure number 1, I'm just getting to the right page. I noticed it earlier that, there we go, 75. Managed by to be assigned, which is the Climate Change and Environment Programme Financial Planning. Do you have any ideas who might be responsible, or that might be assigned to in the forthcoming months?
I think it's anticipated that will sit within James Hendry's area, but again, it's working through who would actually pick that up and what that responsibility will look like. That's just part of understanding of the corporate restructure, where some of the responsibilities sit and some of them are still being worked through.
Any further comments? No? I would encourage everyone to come to the working group. I think it's a worthwhile exercise. So let's go for the recommendation that the contents of this report be noted. Okay, item 8. Jonathan. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. This is the Capital Investment Strategy Interim Report for 24/5. Broadly, we have to bring 3 reports to you as members a year. So one is when we set the budget, one is this interim report, and one is for the outturn position. As you would expect, it broadly sets out changes to our borrowing, investment and capital programme. And there's various enclosures that I'll run through briefly before we open up to questions. Enclosure 2 sets out the position in respect to the council's debt. The top level position is that the debt stood at just short of 585 million. That's including finance, lease, investments. And that has increased by 32 million compared with the start of the year. One of the most significant reasons for that, it will be the purchase of the West Gate, which was 18.5 million plus costs. Then the broader capital programme will make up for the balance of that change. There's one specific technical thing to note, which I won't get into too much detail on, but where we have some leases in place, so we took out some investment leases a number of years ago, they've got index-linked payments within them. So they sit on our balance sheet at evaluation, and there's a lease liability relating to those. And the technical change is simply that they remeasure that now under something called IFRS 16, which is a new accounting standard. And essentially, the index-linked payment will change the measurement of that liability annually. And what we've done is we've remeasured where it was at the start of the year and reassessed it, and it's actually increased the level of debt on our balance sheet by £17 million. What I should also emphasise is it doesn't change anything we pay out in respect to. It's a technical assessment of the value of that lease at a point in time. So it's not changing our cash flows as a council, but it is changing the value that sits on our balance sheet. What we would expect with these index-linked payments, this is a new thing, this would affect all councils, is we modelled some of this, and actually it goes up quite sharply for a period of time and then comes down very sharply, broadly at the latter end of the lease. So we've got to just be careful with our prudential indicators, especially when we set them for next year. We're within our prudential indicators despite the remeasurement at the moment. But we've got to make sure we take that into account when we set our prudential indicators on debt, because this lease liability will be part of our debt. So we've brought a section into the report to just go through that in a little bit of detail. We will no doubt come back to it at year end when we remeasure again. That's the most significant change. Broadly, we are then within all of our objectives in our review of the capital investment strategy. So we continue to take a two-pool approach, so we separate the general fund and the HRA. We have regard to all the potential indicators and we comment where we are in respect of our debt next to those indicators. We continue to, where we invest surplus funds, we continue to do so with appropriate counterparties. And we continue to manage our borrowing below something called the CFR, which is another very technical thing, but broadly is a measure of our underlying need to borrow as a council. And I'll try and make that simpler, which is if we've got surplus funds, we would use those first before we borrow. So the underlying need to borrow is taking account of anything we've already got we're able to use. But we're within that CFR figure as well. And then broadly where we've invested funds, we're probably slightly below the market average, but we're pretty close. And we continue to make returns for the council. And we've made some significant income back during the year so far. And we continue to diversify our borrowing over a range of maturity periods. The main borrowing we took out again was linked back to Westgate, and we very much made an assessment of where our current levels of debt maturity are, and we built into that profile to make sure it sat within that and didn't give us a huge amount of debt to repay at any one point in time. So that's broadly where we are on the debt side of things. Enclosure 3 just provides some more visual aids to set out that position. Also comments on our interest payable and lists some of the counterparties we use as a council. So where we've borrowed on a temporary basis, it tends to be from other local authorities, and there's a list of those local authorities in Enclosure 3. And then Enclosure 4 is the sort of switch over to the capital side of things. And I'd say broadly what that reflects on both the general fund and the HRA is we're mid-year, there's some slippage on some of the programmes, there's some comment about some of that process during the year to date. It also reflects the increase in budget when we reallocated resource in to fund the Westgate purchase on the general fund. Not included in here yet, but subsequent decisions that have been made are to council supported additional funds to address temporary accommodation. So you'll see that in the outturn report. There was £80 million of funds that are now available to use and start to impact on that issue. And there'll be further reports back to relevant committees in due course. So that's the direct capital side of things. There's then sections on our various forms of investment. So we've got a number of assets that are delivering fractionally below the expected return. They're at 4.97% as opposed to 5%, but still generating the council 1.3 million. Their asset there where we've invested in property directly, so freehold acquisition, and they've been managed for a number of years and continue to deliver that income. There's a summary on the Sempra investment, and again it sets out a position. So ultimately we've got loans of 30 million with Sempra. We've got further short-term loan debtor balances to supporting cash flow and accrued interest of 18.8 million in shares. They continue to generate the returns to the council, so we charge a return on the debt we lend to Sempra, and their business plan comes back to the council periodically. Acorn House was a company we acquired for the property within it, and we are now holding broadly as a shell company, so not too much to say there. That property was transferred into the council. And then we've got the investment leases, which were the ones that I was mentioning earlier, which were subject to remeasurement. They are continuing to generate a profit rent. It's actually 1.987 million for the half-year position. I think they made just over 3 at the end of last year, so that's ahead of where we were at, proportionately at the end of the year. So that's really good news for the council. And then finally, we just referenced some strategic assets that the council holds that are not used yet for investment, but are potentially future strategic assets, and their Market Pavement and the Robbins Cinema. So overall, a positive position. The debt position is where we expect it to be. We've made investments. We're managing the new investment in Westgate. Some slippage on the programme, which we're working with relevant parties in the HRA and on the capital programme, and often that's related to specific steps in the process that have to happen. Where we do slip those projects, the budgets then roll into next year and are updated. And if there's a point when we don't need a budget, we will bring back a programme change to you as members as part of budget setting in February. So I'll stop there. There's a lot of information there, Chair, so we might want to go back over things, but thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that. My head's buzzing. Has anyone got any comments on this one? Councillor Jeffrey.
Just a quick point of clarification. Has this been updated since we had our full council on the 21st?
No, this predates full council. So obviously we've brought a revised programme to full council. So if members want to, they can see that change. That was obviously after the mid-year, so it's a slight timing difference. And that obviously was where the 80 million came in. So that will then be reflected in the new programme, and we'll bring that back as part of the outturn report.
Thanks. It's just I wanted to double check, because obviously there's been that change in borrowing, and obviously some of the concerns the 151 officer raised around that. So I was just wondering whether perhaps with this one, if we can look at it again as it's actually been reviewed, because technically this is a snapshot before, but we've made 80 million. Obviously we see billions and what's been spent today by the Chancellor, but it's just that's a lot of money, and it's just a snapshot before we made a decision. So I'm reluctant to even consider endorsing it for Cabinet until we've got that information.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a mid-year report as at the 30th of September, and we bring an outturn report, but there's no reason necessarily. We could bring a further report to capture that. There's no particular issue with that. It's just purely a timing. This report is scheduled for this particular period. As I say, we've got the council report, so we could certainly bring that back, and I think Owen's going to come in.
I was only going to say, obviously, what we did in the council report, we just reflected the impact on the potential code, the operational boundary, the authorised limits. That was reflected in there, so we're still, obviously, that stage was still compliant with the key potential indicators that's out in this report. So it is covered, but we can update this. But this is obviously mid-year, and that happened a few weeks later. We need to take the mid-year position. That's what the statutory requirement we have to do. So that's why we've done it in this format.
Councillor Murphy.
So this report is dated at a specific date, and that date being, it's probably there, but I haven't read it.
Up to and including the 30th of September.
So obviously we borrowed the 80 million after that.
Yes, that's
so
right.
What we're actually endorsing is this report up to that date, and therefore not after.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Davis.
On the Sempra Homes bit, you got which are owned by Basildon Borough Enterprises. What is Basildon Borough Enterprises, please?
Yeah, so our group structure essentially is the council, and then it's Basildon Borough Enterprises, and then Basildon Borough Enterprises holds both Sempra and Acorn. And the theory behind that is if, as a group company, one makes a profit, one makes a loss, Buzzard and Borough Enterprises sits on top and would accumulate the two together potentially. But it's just a structure. If we have any other companies coming in for specific purposes, we've got that one holding company that captures the overall performance of all, and then you've got your individual elements sitting below that that would reflect the individual positions.
Again.
Second question, relating to page 98, I think. There's page 98, further up. Scrolling. So there we go, page 98, maturity profile of outstanding long-term debt. Could you explain the blue columns to us, because there's big ones coming up in 28, and I just wanted to know that we've got assurances that we're on top of that.
Yes, essentially that's the current maturity profile we have. We're obviously always monitoring it. Some debt we've taken out, it's not necessarily even across periods, and it will depend on how much debt at a point in time for a specific purpose we might have taken out. Certainly with the temporary debt for Westgate that we've taken initially, we've taken that over a shorter period to enable us to monitor interest rates, so that when we take it into a more permanent position, we've got the best rate possible for the council. But the blue bars just reflect predominantly the level of debt attaching to maturity in each year. So it's sort of the maximum you go up to is about just short of the 25 million in 35/6. So our Treasury Management Officers will be monitoring this maturity profile, and essentially, well, it depends on the nature, but it's often the debt will be replaced by alternative debt at a point in time, and it's just to enable them to plan ahead and not broadly also not put all our risks. So if interest rates had gone wrong and they were significantly high in 1 year, and all our debt was compressed into that 1 year, we would be exposed to a significant risk on that basis. So they make an assessment and spread it. It's constantly updated, so as debt drops out, they will be replacing. So it may well be that as debt replaced in the next 3 or 4 years gets pushed out back further and it flattens a bit. I'd have to go back and see specifically why there's a couple of very higher or slightly higher debt columns in there, but I would guess it linked to a specific decision at a point in time.
And that point in time could be 20 years ago, for example. Obviously, depending how long we took it out.
Any further comments, anyone? Okay, so just a question from me. If, as Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Murphy said, if we note this is up and including the 30th of September, that we just make sure that this is written down for us.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the period it covers.
Okay, so the recommendation is that the interim report on the Treasury management activities for 24-25 be noted. Any comments and observations made by the committee will be considered when the report is presented to Cabinet and subsequently Council. I can't say that word. Okay. Last, the work programme, item 9. Who's going to put that one in? Oh, no, it's anyone, isn't it? Is it me?
I can do that.
Do you want to do that? Go on.
So this is obviously the work programme for the forthcoming period. Obviously we've spoken about another meeting potentially in December for the account works coming forward, which will confirm, and this really just sets out the routine things that we have every sort of quarter, every 6 months, and then more detail is coming clear on some of the things that have been expected to be confirmed for a long period of time, have been around those audit reports. Obviously, as we're getting a lot more clarity on them, they will be firmed up over the next sort of few months. We'll be able to get them dates planned in properly as to see what's occurring. But it's really the routine things around audit, just planned in going forward. And obviously, I suppose the other thing just to pick out is anything that part of the discussions that members might want to look at with the chair and Sarah as part of the working group as well to be sort of saying.
Is everyone happy with that? Any comments? Yeah? No one? No one? You're letting me down, all of you. Okay, well, if that's the case, I think we've come to a conclusion, have we? Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a safe journey home and all those things. And avoid that traffic out there. Apparently it's busy.